If you told me a simple, friendly visit from my neighbor would end with me sitting in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a cooling mug of tea, feeling like the air itself had changed, I would have laughed. But that night, one quiet knock on my door opened a truth I wasn't ready for. And before I jump in, tell me, from which city are you watching us tonight? I always picture little lights across the map when I read your comments. And if you've been enjoying these stories, if you like a tale that feels a little too real sometimes, please subscribe and tap like. It helps more than you think, and honestly, it makes me feel less alone while I'm telling you something this personal. It started like any other evening I've had 1,000 times. The house was doing that late-day settling sound, soft clicks from the vents, a faint hum from the refrigerator, the occasional groan of wood as the temperature shifted. Outside, my porch light had just flickered on, glowing warm against the early dark. I'd been rinsing dishes, letting the hot water run a little longer than necessary, because I didn't feel like facing the quiet. I'm in that middle stretch of life where quiet can be peaceful one day and heavy the next. I'm 52, old enough to know what I like, old enough to have regrets that don't bite as sharply as they used to, but still young enough to feel surprised when my heart does something unexpected. My husband, Mark, was working late. Again. That's the story I always told myself anyway. Work late, meetings, deadlines, phone calls that couldn't wait. We'd been married a long time. Long enough that you learn each other's rhythms, and long enough that you also learn how easy it is to live beside someone without really touching the center of them. I dried my hands, glanced at the clock, and was deciding whether to turn on the TV or just go upstairs when I heard it. A knock. Not aggressive. Not timid either. Just careful. Like whoever stood on the other side didn't want to startle me. I paused because in a quiet neighborhood, a knock at that hour always means something. A problem, a question, or news. When I opened the door, there he was, my neighbor Daniel. I'd known Daniel for about 3 years, ever since he moved into the house next door after his divorce. That's what people said anyway. He's starting over. He needed a quieter place. He's harmless. Those were the words that floated around the block like polite laundry on a line. Daniel wasn't loud. He wasn't the type to throw backyard parties or rev his car engine for attention. He was the type who brought in your trash bin if a storm rolled through, who waved once with 2 fingers from the steering wheel, who shoveled the sidewalk without being asked. The kind of man people trust before they even realize they've decided to. He stood under my porch light, holding something in both hands, a small plain bakery box. "Hi," he said, and his voice was softer than I expected, like he'd already used up most of it somewhere else. "I'm sorry to bother you. I made a mistake with these. Thought you might want them." I blinked. Mistake with pastries. He gave a quick, awkward smile. It didn't fully reach his eyes. "Cinnamon rolls. I asked for 6. They gave me 12. I don't need 12. I should have laughed. I should have said, "Well, that's a happy mistake," and taken them and wished him good night. That's how simple things are supposed to go. But something about him felt off. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just unsettled, like a man holding himself together by deciding not to move too quickly. "Thank you," I said, taking the box. The warm smell of cinnamon and butter drifted up, sweet and comforting. "That's kind of you." He hesitated. His gaze flicked past my shoulder into the hallway, where a lamp cast a soft pool of light on the framed family photos. "Is Mark home?" The question landed heavier than it should have. "No," I answered. "He's at work." Daniel nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already feared. Then he surprised me by exhaling, one long breath that looked like it had been trapped in his chest all day. "I was hoping," he began, then stopped. His jaw tightened briefly, and he looked down at the porch boards. I was hoping he would be. A little chill ran up my arms. Daniel, is everything okay? He lifted his eyes to mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something raw there. Not anger, not sadness exactly, more like dread. I don't know, he admitted, but I think it's about to not be. That's when I should have closed the door, or called my husband, or asked Daniel to speak tomorrow when it wasn't dark and quiet and just the two of us. Instead, I stepped back. Do you want to come in for a minute? You know how sometimes your mouth says the polite thing before your brain finishes evaluating the risk? That was me. Daniel didn't move right away. He looked toward the street like he expected someone to be watching. Then he nodded once and stepped inside, careful, like he didn't want to disturb anything. The warmth of the house wrapped around us. I led him to the kitchen, set the bakery box on the counter, and reached for the kettle out of habit. Tea? I asked. Sure, he said, but his eyes weren't on the kettle. They kept sliding toward the doorway, then back to me, like he was weighing whether he should speak at all. I tried to keep it normal. I filled the kettle, turned on the burner, set 2 mugs out. The movement steadied me, gave my hands a job so my nerves wouldn't show. Daniel stayed standing near the kitchen table. He didn't sit until I did, and even then, he perched at the edge of the chair as if he might leave at any second. Okay, I said gently, lowering my voice the way you do when you don't want to spook a frightened animal. Tell me what's going on. He stared at the tabletop, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind. Then he said, How well do you think you know your husband? The question made my throat tighten. I let out a small, humorless laugh. We've been married a long time. Daniel nodded. That's not what I asked. I sat still. The kettle began to hiss softly in the background, a thin rising sound that suddenly felt too loud. I don't know what you mean, I said, though I did. Not fully, but enough. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket, and my stomach clenched before I could stop it. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and then set it face down on the table like it weighed too much. I want to be careful, he said. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I think you deserve to know something before it hits you in the face. My fingers curled around the edge of my mug. It was still empty, still waiting for tea, but I held it like an anchor. Daniel met my eyes. Mark came to see me today. My heart skipped, then resumed with a slow, uneasy thud. Why would he come to see you? Daniel's expression tightened, and he swallowed, because he thought I wouldn't tell you. The kettle whistled sharply. I flinched, then stood a little too quickly to turn off the heat. My hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. I poured water into the mugs, the steam rising between us like a curtain. Tell me, I said, and I could hear the strain in my voice. Just tell me. Daniel didn't touch his tea. He looked at it like it was irrelevant to the world he'd stepped into. He asked me for a favor, Daniel said. Not a neighborly one. A personal one. I tried to picture my husband standing next door, speaking to Daniel in that calm, confident tone Mark used when he wanted something. My husband was charming when he needed to be. Always had been. It was one of the reasons I fell for him. What kind of favor? I asked. Daniel hesitated, then said quietly, He asked me to lie, and then he offered me something if I did. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in my ears. About what? Daniel's eyes held mine now, steady and regretful. About you, he said. And that's when the room felt smaller. The kitchen, the familiar cabinets, the little bowl of fruit I never finished before it bruised, everything suddenly looked like a set built around a secret. What about me? I whispered. Daniel took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped even lower. He asked me to tell you, Daniel said, that I saw you with someone. I stared at him, my mind trying to make sense of the words. What? I said too sharply. That doesn't even, Daniel. I haven't. I know, he interrupted quickly, holding up his hands as if to calm me. I know. That's why I'm here. My mouth went dry. I felt heat crawl up my neck, not from guilt, but from the sheer shock of being accused, of realizing my own husband was trying to plant something ugly in the ground. Why would he do that? I asked, and my voice cracked on the last word. Daniel's face softened, and for a second he looked almost pained to answer. Because, he said, he's preparing an exit. The words fell into the space between us like a heavy object dropped into still water, ripples I couldn't yet see. I sat down slowly, my knees weak. An exit, I repeated. From our marriage? Daniel nodded once, and he wants it to look like it was your fault. I stared at the steam rising from my tea as if the swirling air might form the answer I needed. Outside, a car passed, headlights briefly sweeping the window. The normal world kept moving, but inside my kitchen, everything had shifted. I forced myself to look up. What did he offer you? I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked away, ashamed. Money, he said, and something else. Something about the way he said it, careful, reluctant, made my skin prickle. What else? I asked, barely breathing. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He reached for his phone again, flipped it over, and slid it closer to me without unlocking it. I don't want to do this the wrong way, he said, but if I don't show you, you might not believe me. My hand hovered over the phone, fear and curiosity twisting together in my chest. What am I about to see? I asked. Daniel's voice was quiet, steady, and heartbreaking all at once. The proof, he said, that he planned this, and the reason I couldn't keep it from you. My fingers touched the edge of the phone, and I realized in that moment that whatever was on that screen would change everything I thought I knew about my life. And I still didn't know the most shocking part yet. My thumb hovered over Daniel's phone like it might burn me. I looked at him, hoping he'd suddenly laugh and say this was a misunderstanding, that Mark hadn't actually come to him, that the whole thing was a weird mix-up with someone else's name. But Daniel didn't smile. He just sat there, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Before you open it, he said, voice careful, I need you to know I didn't ask for this. I didn't invite it. I swallowed. My tea had cooled enough to drink, but I couldn't make my hand lift the mug. Everything in me felt pinned in place. I believe you, I said, though my chest still hurt with the effort of saying it. Daniel's eyes flicked to the hallway again, like he expected the front door to open any second. If Mark finds out I showed you, he'll say I'm trying to break you two up. I let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. He's already trying. That did something to Daniel's expression. A brief flash of relief, like hearing me say it out loud, meant he wasn't crazy for seeing it. I turned the phone toward me and unlocked it with the code he quietly gave. My hands were steadier than I felt. The screen opened to a text thread labeled Mark. There were messages from earlier that day. I didn't read them slowly at first. My eyes skimmed, grabbing words like they were pieces of glass. Mark, I need you to do me a favor. Just say you saw her. Nothing complicated. Mark, I'll make it worth your while. Mark, you understand what I'm saying, right? Then another message, later, colder. Mark, don't get noble on me. This is simple. Mark, if you don't help me, you'll regret it. My stomach dropped. Not because I didn't believe it. Some part of me had already accepted it the moment Daniel said, exit, but because seeing Mark's words in plain black letters stripped away all my excuses. There were more messages underneath. And that's when my breath caught. Mark, and I know you've got a thing for her. Don't pretend you don't. Mark, you help me. You get what you want. Mark, I'll be out of the picture. You can have your shot. I felt heat rush into my face, not embarrassment exactly, but a sudden strange fury. The audacity of it. Mark speaking about me like I was a prize being traded. I looked up sharply. Daniel's cheeks had gone slightly red, but his eyes held mine with an honesty that didn't flinch. "You wrote that?" I asked, even though I was staring right at it. Daniel nodded once. He did. My throat tightened. Do you have a thing for me?" It came out blunt, too blunt, but once it was in the air, I couldn't take it back. Daniel's gaze dropped for a second, then lifted again. "I'm your neighbor," he said quietly. "I've always tried to be respectful." "That's not an answer." He inhaled slowly. "I noticed you," he admitted, "the way anyone notices someone they see often. You're kind, you're present, and yes, sometimes I thought you were beautiful. But thinking something isn't the same as acting on it." The way he said it didn't feel like a line. It felt like a confession he was almost ashamed of, not because it was inappropriate, but because it made him vulnerable. My anger shifted, not disappeared, but changed shape, because the person who should have protected my dignity was the one trying to use it. I scrolled further. There was an audio message, a small play button. My hands went cold. Daniel leaned forward. "That's from when he came over," he said. I turned on the recorder in my pocket after he started talking. I didn't know what he'd say, but I knew I didn't want it to become my word against his. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs as I pressed play. Mark's voice filled the kitchen, casual and confident, like he was ordering a coffee. "You're single, Daniel. I'm not stupid. I've seen you looking. She's lonely. She'll crack eventually. All I need is a reason to walk away clean. Help me out, and I'll help you out. You tell her you saw her with someone. I'll do the rest. She'll be too ashamed to fight." There was a pause in the recording, and then Daniel's voice, quieter but firm. "No," Mark scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. It's just words." Daniel again. "It's her life." Mark. "It's my life too, and I'm done. You want to be the hero? Fine, but don't act surprised when you get dragged into it." The audio ended. The silence after it felt like a vacuum. Even the fridge hum sounded distant. I set the phone down carefully, as if dropping it would shatter the kitchen tile. My husband's voice, saying my name like I was a strategy, like I was a problem to be solved. I pressed my fingertips to my forehead and tried to breathe. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't rush in with advice or blame. He just waited, giving me space like that was the only respectful thing he could do. When I finally looked up, my eyes were wet. I hated that I was crying in front of him. Not because Daniel didn't deserve my honesty, but because I'd spent too long being the woman who kept everything neat and contained. "I feel stupid," I whispered. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because there were signs," I said. My voice shook with anger now, the kind that arrives after shock wears off. The distance, the excuses, the way he'd look through me sometimes like he'd already left. And I still kept telling myself it was normal. Daniel's voice stayed gentle. "It's not stupid to try to believe the best in someone you've loved for years." That nearly broke me, because it was true, and because Mark clearly counted on that part of me. I wiped my cheek quickly and looked at the cinnamon roll box on the counter like it belonged to another life. "So he wanted to destroy me on the way out," I said, more to myself than to Daniel. Daniel nodded. "He wanted you to be the reason, so he could be the victim." I sat back in my chair. My mind started doing what it always does when something big hits, searching for details, making lists, planning. If I stayed in feelings too long, I'd drown. Did he say why? I asked. Did he mention anything specific? Daniel hesitated. He said something about money. My stomach tightened. What kind of money? Daniel looked at me with a pained seriousness. He implied there was someone else, that he'd made promises. He didn't say her name to me, but he said he needed to wrap things up before certain paperwork happened. I felt my pulse spike. Paperwork. My mind went to the things we'd built together. The house, the accounts, the retirement plan, the life that looked stable from the outside. And the most unsettling part was how calm Mark sounded in that recording, like he'd rehearsed it. A small sound escaped my throat, half laugh, half gasp. So he wanted to make me the villain before I even knew I was in a story. Daniel's expression softened. That's why I came over. I stared at him for a long second, and something shifted in the room again. Not just the shock of what Mark had done, but the reality of who Daniel was being in this moment. He didn't come for gossip. He didn't come to win points. He came because he couldn't live with letting me walk into an ambush. You didn't have to, I said quietly. I know, he replied, but I couldn't watch you get hurt like that. The words landed in my chest with an unfamiliar warmth, and it scared me because my world was already tilting. The last thing I needed was another complication. So I did what women my age learn to do when life starts moving too fast. I set a boundary. Daniel, I said, voice steadying, I need you to hear me. I'm grateful. Truly. But I'm not looking for anything. Not comfort. Not romance. Not anything that would make this mess even messier. He nodded immediately. I understand. Do you? I asked, because I needed to be sure. Daniel's eyes held mine. Yes, I'm not here for that. I'm here because you deserve to know the truth. Whatever you decide after this is yours. That shift made me feel safer. And it did. But it also made me realize how long it had been since someone spoke to me like my choices mattered. I stood up, needing to move. I walked to the sink, turned the faucet on just to hear water, and stared at my hands under the stream. I don't even know what to do next, I admitted. Daniel's voice came from behind me, steady and practical. First, save that recording and those texts somewhere safe. Email them to yourself, maybe to a friend you trust. Second, don't confront him tonight if you feel unsafe. I turned to look at him. Unsafe? Daniel's jaw tightened. He threatened me when I said no. Not physically, but the way he said it, like he's willing to be cruel if it protects him. A chill went through me. I thought of Mark coming home, tired and smiling like nothing happened. I thought of him kissing my cheek with that absent affection that had become routine. I thought of him lying in bed beside me while my mind replayed his voice saying, "She'll crack eventually." I reached for my phone on the counter and realized my hands were shaking again. Daniel stood, but he didn't approach. He stayed where he was, giving me space even while he offered support. That restraint mattered more than any dramatic promise would have. "Can you?" I asked, then stopped, swallowing. "Can you stay a little longer? Not because I want anything. Just because I need a minute to feel like I'm not the only person on earth who knows what's real." His expression softened, and he nodded. Of course. I sent the recording to myself. I took screenshots. I created a folder I'd never imagined needing. And as I did, I felt something else grow alongside my fear. Clarity. Not the kind that makes everything easy, but the kind that makes you stop begging for scraps of truth. When I finally looked up, Daniel was watching me with a quiet steadiness, like he was silently telling me I could handle whatever came next. Then I heard it. A car door outside. Footsteps on the walkway, the familiar jingle of keys. My chest tightened as the front lock turned. Mark was home. The sound of the door unlocking felt louder than it ever had before. Daniel and I both froze for a split second, not in guilt, not in panic, just in awareness that the moment we'd been bracing for had arrived. Mark's footsteps came down the hallway, steady and unhurried, the same rhythm I'd heard thousands of times, the same rhythm that used to comfort me. "Hey," he called out casually. "You still up?" I looked at Daniel. He didn't move toward the back door. He didn't look for an escape. He simply stood beside the kitchen table, shoulders squared, like a man who had already decided he wouldn't hide. That, more than anything, steadied me. "Yes," I answered, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "We're in the kitchen." There was the slightest pause in the hallway, just enough to register the word "we." Then Mark stepped into the doorway. He stopped when he saw Daniel. The change in his face was subtle, but I saw it. A tightening around the eyes, a flicker of irritation that disappeared almost instantly behind a smooth smile. "Well," Mark said lightly, setting his keys down on the counter. "Didn't realize we were hosting." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "I brought cinnamon rolls." Mark's eyes shifted to the bakery box, then to me. "That's so." I held his gaze this time. I didn't look down. I didn't rush to explain. "Yes," I said, "and he brought something else." For a fraction of a second, something sharp passed through Mark's eyes. Suspicion. Calculation. "Oh," he replied, tone still easy. "What's that?" "The truth." The word hung in the air like a dropped plate that hadn't shattered yet. Mark gave a short laugh. "Okay, I feel like I missed a meeting. What's going on?" I reached for my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That surprised me. The fear had burned off, leaving something clearer underneath. "You went to Daniel today," I said evenly. Mark didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I did." His quick admission almost caught me off guard. "And you asked him to lie to me." There it was. No turning back. Mark's jaw shifted slightly. "I think you're misunderstanding." Daniel spoke then, his voice firm but controlled. "You asked me to say I saw her with someone else." Mark's gaze snapped to him, the friendliness gone now. "This is between me and my wife." "No," I said quietly. "You brought him into it." Mark looked at me, and I saw it clearly now, the version of him I'd refused to see before. The strategist. The man who thought 2 steps ahead. The man who believed he could manage outcomes if he positioned the pieces correctly. "You're really going to take his word over mine?" Mark asked, and there was hurt in his voice. Carefully placed hurt. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pressed play. His own voice filled the kitchen again. Calm. Calculated. Dismissive. "She's lonely. She'll crack eventually." The color drained from his face. The recording continued. I didn't stop it early. I let every word play. Every implication. Every offer. When it ended, the silence was no longer fragile. It was solid, heavy. Mark didn't look at me at first. He stared at the countertop like it had betrayed him. "You recorded me?" he asked Daniel, his tone low. "Yes," Daniel replied simply. Mark gave a short, humorless chuckle. "Unbelievable." "No," I said softly. "What's unbelievable is that you thought I'd never find out." He looked at me then, really looked at me, searching for weakness, for doubt, for the woman who would smooth this over. "You don't understand," he said. "Then help me," I replied, "because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you were trying to destroy my reputation before walking out." Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen, like he needed motion to think. "I didn't want it to be messy," he said finally. I'd almost laughed at that. "Messy?" I repeated. "You were going to accuse me of cheating." He stopped pacing. "I wasn't going to accuse you. I was going to suggest there were issues, doubts. That's different." "That's manipulation," Daniel said quietly. Mark's eyes flashed. "Stay out of this." "You made it his business," I said again, my voice sharper now. "You offered him money. And me." That last word seemed to hit him. "I didn't offer you," he snapped. "Don't twist it. You told him he could have his shot once you were out of the picture," I said, like I was an opportunity. Mark looked genuinely irritated now, as if the moral issue was inconveniencing him. "I was trying to solve a problem," he said. "We've been unhappy for years. That one landed differently, because it wasn't entirely untrue. We had drifted. We had stopped talking about the things that mattered. We had become polite roommates more often than partners. But unhappiness isn't betrayal. Distance isn't deceit. So you punish me?" I asked, "instead of talking to me." Mark's shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, he looked tired instead of defensive. "I didn't know how to tell you," he admitted. "There is someone else." The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they split something open inside me. I had suspected it. Of course I had. Late nights, hidden screams, the sudden gym membership. But hearing it confirmed was like feeling the ground give way under your feet. "How long?" I asked. "A year," he said. "A year. 12 months of shared dinners, holidays, birthdays. A year of me thinking we were just struggling. And you were going to make me the reason," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark didn't deny it this time. "I didn't want to lose everything in a divorce," he said plainly. "If you were at fault, it would have been simpler." There it was. Not passion, not confusion, not even regret. Strategy. I felt something inside me go still. Not numb, not broken. Clear. Daniel hadn't moved. He stood quietly, not interfering, not escalating. His presence wasn't possessive. It was steady, supportive. That mattered more now than it had earlier. I looked at Mark, the man I had built half my life with. "You underestimated me," I said. He frowned slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I replied, my voice firm now, "you thought I'd crumble under shame, that I'd defend myself instead of asking why you were attacking." Mark's jaw tightened. "I won't fight you like that," I continued. "If you want to leave, leave, but you don't get to rewrite me on your way out." The words surprised even me, but they felt right. Mark exhaled slowly. "So what now?" That question used to terrify me. Now it didn't. "Now," I said, "we do this honestly. With lawyers. With paperwork. With truth." His eyes flicked briefly to Daniel again, as if recalculating the entire board. "You've made your choice," Mark said quietly. "No," I answered. "You did, a year ago." There was no shouting, no thrown objects, no dramatic scene, just the sound of something ending with more dignity than it had been given. Mark picked up his keys again. "I'll stay at a hotel tonight," he said. I nodded. I didn't ask him to stay. I didn't ask him to go. He paused at the doorway, looking at me like he was seeing a version of me he hadn't planned for. "You're really okay with this?" he asked. I took a breath. No, I said honestly, but I'll survive it. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that. The door closed behind him. The house fell quiet again. I stood there for several seconds, staring at nothing. Then my knees weakened slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table. Daniel stepped forward instinctively, then stopped himself. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I let out a shaky breath. "I don't know yet." He nodded. "That's fair." We stood there in the quiet kitchen, the cinnamon rolls still unopened, the tea long gone cold. "You should probably go," I said softly. Not because I wanted him gone, but because I needed to stand in this new reality on my own feet. Daniel understood immediately. "I will," he said, "but if you need anything at all, I'm next door." I looked at him, really looked at him. "I know," I said. And for the first time that night, the shock wasn't about betrayal. It was about the strange, unexpected way truth had walked up to my door in the shape of a neighbor holding a box of cinnamon rolls. And how, in the middle of losing one life, I had found the strength to step into another. After Daniel left, the house felt different. Not emptier, just honest. For years, I'd been living inside a version of my marriage that required constant translation, interpreting silences, explaining away absences, convincing myself that busy meant commitment and not avoidance. That night, for the first time, there was no story to maintain, no performance, just truth. I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table long after the porch light switched itself off. The cinnamon rolls were still untouched. I finally opened the box sometime after midnight and took one out, not because I was hungry, but because I needed to do something ordinary in the middle of something extraordinary. The sweetness surprised me. Warm, soft, familiar. I remember thinking how strange it was that comfort could sit right beside heartbreak and not cancel it out. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across the bedroom floor. Mark's side of the bed was untouched. That sight hurt more than the argument, not because I wanted him there, but because it confirmed that the life I had known was officially shifting. He texted around 8 a.m. "We need to talk logistics." No apology, no attempt to soften it. Just logistics. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "We will, with lawyers." My hands didn't shake when I sent it. The days that followed were practical. Meetings, phone calls, documents. I learned more about our finances in 1 week than I had in the last decade, and every time I uncovered something I hadn't known, I felt less ashamed and more aware. That was the real shock of it all. Not that he had another woman, not that he had tried to manipulate the narrative, but that I had quietly accepted less transparency than I deserved for years. Daniel kept his distance at first, and I appreciated that. He waved if he saw me in the driveway. Once he left a small grocery bag by my door with a note that simply said, "You forgot these in your car last week." It was milk and eggs I hadn't realized were missing. No drama, no hovering, just steady kindness. About 2 weeks after Mark moved his last things out, I found myself standing in the backyard one evening, staring at the fence that separated our houses. The air was warm, early summer. Fireflies had just begun to blink in the fading light. I didn't plan to call out to Daniel, but I did. "Hey," I said softly. He looked up from where he was watering his plants. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he walked closer to the fence, keeping a respectful distance. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I considered the question honestly. "I'm clearer," I said. He nodded. "That makes sense." I was angry. I admitted. I was embarrassed. I questioned everything, but I'm not ashamed anymore. You shouldn't be, he replied. I looked at him carefully. There was no expectation in his eyes, no pressure, just concern. I've been thinking about something, I said. He tilted his head slightly. What's that? You told him no, I said. You could have stayed out of it. You could have taken the easy path. Daniel shrugged lightly. It didn't feel easy. It might have been, I said, for you. He met my gaze steadily. Not if it meant becoming someone I didn't want to be. That answer settled deep inside me. We stood there in the quiet evening, separated by a wooden fence and a lot of complicated history. And for the first time, the tension between us wasn't sharp or confusing. It was thoughtful. I need to say something clearly, I began. He listened. I'm not looking to replace one relationship with another, I said. I need to know who I am without being someone's wife before I can be anything else. Daniel didn't flinch. I understand. I don't want gratitude to turn into obligation, I continued. You didn't save me so that I'd owe you. A small smile touched his face. That's not how this works. Relief moved through me at his response. But I added carefully, I would like to get coffee sometime. As two adults who respect each other. No expectations. He smiled a little wider then. I'd like that. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no music swelling in the background, no cinematic embrace. Just two people choosing to move forward carefully. And that felt far more powerful. The divorce process took months. There were tense conversations, negotiations, moments when old habits tried to pull me back into guilt or self-doubt. But every time I felt myself slipping into the role Mark had tried to assign me, the unreasonable one, the unstable one, I remembered the recording. I remembered the clarity of that kitchen table. I started therapy. I reconnected with friends I had slowly drifted away from. I even took a weekend trip alone to a small coastal town I'd always wanted to visit but never made time for. For the first time in years, my decisions weren't filtered through someone else's comfort. Daniel and I did get coffee. Then dinner, weeks later. We talked about ordinary things at first. Work, books, the strange way neighborhoods develop personalities. There was no rush, no grand declarations. What surprised me most was how easy it felt to speak honestly. To say, I'm still healing, and not worry that it would make me less desirable. To admit, I'm scared of making another mistake, and hear, that's understandable.